Chancellor, I now present a candidate for the degree of Doctor of the University. The Council of the University has resolved to award the degree of Doctor of the University to Janette Turner Hospital. Janette Turner Hospital was born in Melbourne in 1942 and educated at Wilston State School and Mitchelton State High School in Brisbane. After obtaining a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Queensland, as well as a teaching diploma from the then Kelvin Grove Teachers College, she taught at Mossman High School in North Queensland. She later moved to Canada, where she graduated from Queen's University with a Master of Arts degree. Bored and frustrated with teaching in Kingston, she turned to writing in 1975. She won her first award in 1978 for a short story published in the magazine Atlantic Monthly. This story was later developed into a novel called The Ivory Swing, which won the $50,000 Seal Award in 1982, Canada's leading literary prize for a first novel and the world's second richest literary prize behind the Nobel Prize for Literature. The book was published in Canada, America, Britain, Australia, Sweden and Finland, and was listed as Editor's Choice by the Washington Post newspaper. Since her first book, Janette Turner Hospital has won critical acclaim for her work both in Australia and overseas. As well as The Ivory Swing, 1982, she's written 6 other bestsellers, including The Tiger in the Tiger Pit, 1983, Borderline, 1985, Dislocations, 1986, Charades, 1988, Isobars, 1990, and The Last Magician, 1992. Praised for her evocative use of language and imagery and her exquisitely drawn characters, she is the recipient of numerous literary awards. She was named in Canada's Best 10 Younger Writers for 1986, including the Editor's Choice, as well as Best Short Fiction 1985 and 1987. Her novel Borderline was runner-up for the National Book Award Australia at the Adelaide's Arts Festival in 1986, and her novel Charades was shortlisted for the prestigious Miles Franklin Literary Award in 1989. Her short fiction appeared in Best Short Stories UK on 3 separate occasions in the early 1990s. As well as being passionate about her writing, Janette Turner Hospital is also dedicated to the academic life. She has been a writer in residence at Boston University, the University of Sydney, La Trobe University, the University of Ottawa, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. More recently, she has been working as writer in residence for Queen's University at the Hurstmonceux Castle campus in the United Kingdom. It is an irony of her nomadic lifestyle that she has been writing a novel set in outback Queensland whilst ensconced in the battlements of a 15th century castle. Despite her wide travels and living in Canada and the United States, Janette Turner Hospital's thoughts remain firmly entrenched in Australia, in its people and its landscapes. Her Australian background permeates most of her work, whether it be the mystique of the North Queensland rainforests or Brisbane's subtropical hazes. She has the unique talent of making familiar worlds seem exotic and mysterious, including everyday places such as her family grocer's on Newmarket Road, Samford's rural environs, or Sugar Donuts in McWhirters. Her finely honed curiosity and faith in humanity has distilled itself in sharply observed characters and a lyrical style that is vibrant with life. Janette Turner Hospital has intimated that it is the very expressiveness of Queensland that has captured her imagination, with its rich imagery of droughts and floods, dust bowl and Daintree jungle continuing to surface in her short stories and novels. She has described Queensland as a permanent mood that one carries around the world, and that absence from her beloved state has acted as a powerful aphrodisiac. She says, as you grow older, the primitive things have a stronger and stronger force that pull you back to your starting place. In the mind and prose of Janette Turner Hospital, Queensland will always remain a lush lyric poem. It is fitting that the Council of Griffith University should honour Janette Turner Hospital in recognition of her distinguished contributions to literature. Chancellor, it is with very great pleasure that I present to you Janette Turner Hospital for admission to the degree of Doctor of the University.
I now call upon Janette Turner Hospital, Doctor of the University, to deliver the occasional address.
Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, distinguished guests, graduates, members of the University, ladies and gentlemen. I wish, first and foremost, to express my very great pleasure, didn't expect to feel quite so overwhelmed, in fact, in receiving the honour conferred upon me this evening. I am particularly pleased to be so honoured in my hometown of Brisbane and my home state of Queensland, surrounded by so many friends with whom I was at primary school and high school and university and teachers' college. And now that I'm Dr. Hospital, maybe I'll be able to come up with a more sophisticated answer to a rather startling phone call I received a few years ago. Without any warning or preamble whatsoever, a somewhat panicky and sepulchral voice asked, "Are you the one that takes blood?" And then there was one year when we were listed in the yellow pages of the Boston telephone directory. If you looked up hospital in the white pages, you found a one-line entry. It said, "Hospitals see yellow pages." And there, just below Boston City Hospital, was my husband's name, the Griffith Hospital. We received a number of rather interesting and curious phone calls and letters as a result of this listing, but my favourite was a letter from Italy, addressed to the Registrar, the Griffith Hospital, Cambridge, Massachusetts. "Dear Sir," it said, "I am a medical student studying at the University of Bologna. I wish to do my internship in the United States. I have heard of the fame of your hospital and request that you send me the necessary application forms," etc. So you can see, with such a history of misunderstandings, I couldn't help wondering if another mistake had been made when I received the following fax with this helpful advice. I quote, "It has now been determined which faculties will be presenting graduates at the September 95 ceremony. You may find this information useful in the preparation of a speech which would be of interest to all the faculties concerned. Those faculties are Faculty of Asian and International Studies, Business and Hotel Management, Engineering and Applied Science, Education, Education in the Arts, Humanities, Nursing, Health and Science." My first thought was, oh my God, how on earth do I find common ground between engineering and nursing, hotel management and the arts, Asian studies and applied science? But then I'm a writer, and writers instinctively turn to storytelling as a way of solving riddles and untangling contradictions. So my second thought was of a story, a true story, about the sculptor Alberto Giacometti at a moment when he felt overwhelmed by conflicting possibilities. Giacometti was one of the great sculptors of this century, a Swiss, and the Swiss, as you know, have a considerable reputation for decorum and moral rectitude. When Giacometti was 18, he was a newly enrolled student at the School of Fine Arts in Geneva. Like all 18-year-old boys, all normal ones, especially those who grew up in strict societies, and especially if they're still virgins, Giacometti was a little obsessed with sex at the time. Imagine his turmoil at one of his first classes when there in front of him appeared an extremely curvaceous and entirely nude model named Lulu. Draw her in whatever way you want, the instructor said. Well, what sensual plenitude for a young artist. How to decide on focus. Giacometti began drawing with obsessive energy. He did sketch after sketch, angle after angle, more and more detailed anatomical studies. And every single sketch was a more and more detailed study of Lulu's foot. He never got above the ankle. But what a sexy foot. All of Lulu's sensuality was captured in that arch and those tendons. Well, it seemed to me I had to cast around for the equivalent of Giacometti's foot for this speech. And so my third thought was of three outstanding figures of this century who dealt in incongruous combinations, the way the rest of us manage complicated maneuvers like reading the newspaper and eating breakfast at the same time. I decided to make them the patron saints of this talk and of my words of advice to today's graduates. Officially, they're scientists, but they can never be easily corralled into any one faculty or department. I speak of Benoit Mandelbrot, who's still living, and of Heisenberg and of Einstein, who aren't. Benoit Mandelbrot is the father of fractal geometry, of the mathematics of chaos, and of the famous Mandelbrot set, the most complex problem set in mathematics, which, pictured diagrammatically in color on a computer screen, looks like a sumptuous Midsummer Night's Dream of some silken textile designer, all rich paisley swirls and seahorses. Mandelbrot is currently a distinguished professor of mathematics at Harvard University, although when the New York Times Sunday magazine did a profile of him a few years ago, other distinguished mathematicians from across the country were quoted as saying, "Whatever it is that Mandelbrot is, he's not one of us." A few years ago, Mandelbrot listened to himself being introduced before a public lecture as someone who had taught economics at Harvard, engineering at Yale, physiology at the Einstein School of Medicine, statistical theory at IBM, before winding up back at Harvard as professor of mathematics. When he got up to speak after this introduction, he said, "I sometimes wonder if I exist." Indeed, in each field in which he has worked and taught, Mandelbrot has been regarded as a renegade. It has been said of him that he has failed to exist with distinction in a long line of different fields. Heisenberg was an excellent classics student. He read Greek and Latin literature. He also loved German literature, knew most of Goethe by heart, and was a fine pianist. But he won the Nobel Prize for Physics for his work on quantum mechanics in 1932. And Einstein, well, he doesn't need an introduction. But these three were traffickers in incongruities, to use the phrase of Howard Gardner, the foremost conductor of research into the phenomenon of creativity. And Gardner sees the essence of creativity to lie precisely there, in crossing traditional boundaries, breaking the rules, trafficking in incongruities, whether we're talking about quantum physics or hotel management or teaching in a classroom. Creative people, he says, are radical disregarders of received notions of the proper boundaries. Let me explain this at the simplest level, the level at which all of us truly are creative geniuses, in childhood and in dreams. Piaget noted that if a child is given a crayon and asked to draw a truck, the child is just as likely to pretend that the crayon is a truck and to race it around a tabletop, making vroom vroom noises. Later, in school, the child will be taught that the correct relationship between a crayon and a truck is a flat outline on a piece of paper, and the child will forget all the other possible creative links between crayon and truck. Fortunately, children, especially preschool children, don't yet know the proper boundaries, and so they disregard them all the time. Children are wildly creative, but alas, we grow into dullness. We are educated into conformity. Most of us only tap that free-floating creativity again in dreams. Most of us. But some people manage to hang on to a childlike innocence and onto daydreaming. Artists, scientists who make breakthroughs, outstanding school teachers, administrators, hotel managers, ordinary people in their most fortunate creative moments. Listen to what Einstein had to say on the importance of daydreaming in his life. When I examine myself and my methods of thought, I come to the conclusion that the gift of fantasy has meant more to me than my talent for understanding scientific knowledge. At the Media Lab at MIT, where I have been fortunate enough to teach, it's one of the foremost institutes of scientific research in the world. Researchers regularly bring in young school children between the ages of 6 and 10 and let them loose on the computers. They watch what the children do. The director of the institute reports that some of his most brilliant breakthroughs have come from 7-year-olds. So here's my first piece of creative advice to tonight's graduates, whatever their field of endeavor. Daydream on. Watch your children. Listen to your children. Become childlike again within your own specialty and slither outside that rigid frame of orthodox thought. And above all, take your daydreaming seriously. There's something else besides creative genius that Mandelbrot, Heisenberg, and Einstein had in common, and that was failure. Mandelbrot, the great mathematician, never mastered the multiplication table above the 5 times level. He never had any formal schooling in mathematics because he spent most of what would have been his school years as a Jewish refugee hiding in France. He used to keep himself occupied while he was hiding by setting himself complicated mathematical riddles and working them out from his own invented first principles. After the war, when he was able to take the university entrance exam in mathematics, he did rather poorly because he didn't know any of the rules or the equations, but he squeaked through by working things out the long way round. Heisenberg almost failed his PhD thesis, his PhD thesis orals, because he couldn't answer a simple question on how a battery worked. He had a PhD committee of 3 professors. The one who asked him the question about the battery wanted to fail him. A second professor said he was the most brilliant physics student the University of Munich had ever had and wanted to give him first-class honors. The third suggested they compromise, so he was passed with a gentleman's C. Einstein, as a child, was very late in learning to talk. He was dyslexic. He failed to graduate from the gymnasium, which is our equivalent of high school, and failed to get into university on his first try. And when he did finally graduate from university, he was unable to get an academic teaching position. In other words, to cite Howard Gardner again, the secret of those who make great creative breakthroughs in whatever field is not that they don't face obstacles and not that they don't have failures. The secret lies in how they react to obstacles and failures. So here's my second piece of advice to tonight's graduates. You reached a joyful and important milestone, and we all congratulate you. But starting almost immediately, next month, if not this one, you're going to come up against the little slings and arrows that wait for every career and every life. My advice is to regard each setback and each failure as a sort of lucky break pushing you on to greatness. Greet it as an interesting challenge. Say to yourself, well, given that I've slammed into this ghastly dead end, or given that I've dug myself into this very deep hole, what's the most interesting thing I can do while I'm here? And lest you think this is glib armchair advice, let me tell you that my own experience, my nomadic life, my tangential career redirections, and several career dead ends have all convinced me that there are no roadblocks one can't get around. Not only that, one's life and one's career are all the richer for the detours. I have about 5 aborted careers behind me. Each time one changes countries, one's credentials from all previous countries are not recognized. One has to start again from scratch. I began as a high school teacher in Queensland, but also from economic necessity or geographical necessity or both. I've been a librarian at Harvard University, a dressmaker for a high fashion boutique in Boston, a draftsman for an engineering firm of precision tool makers in London, a sort of makeshift temporary expert on 101 ways to cook paddy rice and coconuts in a South Indian village, a lecturer in English in a maximum security prison for men in Canada, and a lecturer in medieval literature at various universities in various countries, and most recently, a writer in residence at various universities in various countries. I'm beginning to feel a bit like Mandelbrot. I feel that my resume should read, "She has failed to hold permanent positions in a long list of different fields in different countries." But Howard Gardner suggests that the great creative breakthroughs, whether we're talking about the arts or physics or architecture or innovations in education or changes in management styles, all come on the far side of failure and of dead ends. It's when there's no way on and no way out that new routes and new ways of traveling are forged. I remember not long ago being riveted by one response to the kind of setback that none of us, I trust, will ever encounter. Perhaps many of you have read that remarkable book, Life and Death in Shanghai by Nian Cheng. Nian Cheng was born in Peking in 1915, and she received a degree from the London School of Economics in 1938. She married a Chinese diplomat, and in the 40s they lived in Canberra. In the 50s, after their return to China, she was a management advisor to Shell Petroleum. Her husband died on the eve of the Cultural Revolution, and during those chaotic times, her teenage daughter was captured and beaten to death by the Red Guards, and she herself was arrested and kept in solitary confinement for 6.5 years. She was put in a small cell with only a dirty cot and a toilet bowl. The cell was filthy, it smelled bad, there were wet patches of slime on the walls. She was given a copy of the works of Chairman Mao and a number of sheets of paper on which she was to write her confession as a running dog of imperialism and an enemy of the people. A situation as extreme as that would double most of us up with misery and paralyze us. And she did feel acute anxiety about her daughter, but she said to herself, "Is there anything I can do right now that will make me feel a little less miserable?" And she took the pages that she'd been given for writing her confession, and she pasted them like wallpaper over the patches of slime on the walls. She felt so proud of herself when she'd done this that her energy and courage began to return, and it was by such small daily acts of creative thinking that she triumphantly survived those years of solitary confinement and humiliation. So, graduates, in saluting you, what better thing can I wish you than many obstacles, failures, setbacks, and roadblocks, and the creative energy to get around them triumphantly.